UFC 200 is upon us. It will be on Saturday, July 9th, starting on pay-per-view at 10 p.m. Eastern with 5 amazing fights. But before I get to my complete breakdown and picks of those 5 main event caliber fights, I will go over the undercard. And as most know, I normally don't go over the undercard, but this is UFC 200, and this may be the biggest card ever assembled in UFC history. So I will look over the undercard, starting first with the Fight Pass portion. 3 fights on there, starting first at 6:30 Eastern, followed by 4 fights as the FS1 prelims will hit your TVs at 8 p.m. Eastern. Crazy. The first fight of the night. This would normally easily be a main card fight on a pay-per-view or FS1 or Fox, however you want to look at it. The legend, Takanori Gomi, the only Pride lightweight champion, will be taking on longtime UFC veteran Jim Miller. And before I comment on the fight, I just want to say, if this is Gomi's last fight, I have been a fan pretty much since I started watching the sport. And his tenure in the UFC, obviously not quite as dominant as his years over in Japan and fighting in Pride, but still a tremendous career. Will go down as one of the pioneers for the smaller guys in the sport, and probably will find himself in the UFC Hall of Fame in some fashion sooner rather than later. And while it's not guaranteed this will be his last fight, it very well could be. And I think because of that, I would have liked to seen his fight maybe placed a little higher. But that's a little semantics. But Jim Miller against Takanori Gomi. Gomi, even at 40-plus fights in his career, now in his late 30s, still very dangerous, still can knock you out with just one punch, and can still deliver a beating on you. But Jim Miller is a very tough guy, very tough to finish. In fact, I don't think he's ever, I think besides Donald Cerrone knocking him out in Atlantic City, that's the only time he's ever been knocked out. He has been submitted a few times, but that's not really Gomi's game. In fact, I think he has very few submission wins to his credit. Looking at the UFC website, they listed 17% of his 35 victories are by submission, and that boils down to 6 of 35. Most of his wins coming actually by decision, 16 of 35, but does have 13 knockouts to his credit. He has been submitted 6 times in his career, and you can definitely tell he's starting to fade, because before his fight against Miles Jury, he had never been knocked out before in his career. He has now been knocked out back-to-back fights, and both of them in the first round. Now, luckily, he's taking on Jim Miller, who's not known for knocking dudes out, really grinding on them with his grappling, either getting a decision or a submission. 14 of 25 wins by submission, 8 decision. Only has 3 knockouts in his whole entire career, and that last knockout he had was, you got to go back to March of 2011 when he knocked out Kamal Shalarus at UFC 128. So it's been a while for him. And much like Gomi, Jim Miller's also fallen on hard times, as he's lost 4 out of his last 5 fights. His only victory coming in July of last year, where he narrowly beat Danny Castillo. He has been beaten twice since then, losing to Michael Chiesa and Diego Sanchez. Really, for Jim Miller, I don't think this is his last fight. I still think he has a little left in the tank in terms of overall competing, but he's not going to get back to the top of this division, I think, anytime soon. You could make a case that if he loses, he could either retire or will most likely be cut from the UFC. I could really see that. And for Gomi, I really do think this is his last fight. I think his last 2 performances have not been great. Luckily for him, he's taking on a guy that's not a knockout guy. I think it's going to be a fun fight. Styles always make fight. Both guys, looking to, get back on a win, whether it's their last fight or whether they're just trying to get a win. So I think it should be pretty exciting. Gegard Mousasi against Thiago Santos, a matchup of 2 top 15 middleweight contenders. Mousasi, of course, was originally supposed to be taking on Derek Brunson. If that was still the fight, I would think it'd be a little more competitive. That's not to take anything away from Santos, but I think the wrestling presence that Brunson brings to the table, to me, would have made a huge difference in this fight. Santos is a pretty good striker. He's going to be maybe a little bigger, size-wise, a little more strength. But Mousasi is such a cerebral guy. He's very hard to hit. He does a good job of masking his shots. He can hit you with a lot of output. And his overall demeanor, since it's so kind of calm, almost like he doesn't want to be there, he's very hard to predict, and you can't really get inside of him. It's hard to kind of figure out what he's going to do with that demeanor that he brings to the table. And I think Santos, I think he's going to be in for a little bit of a rude awakening. I don't think he's fought anybody the caliber of Gegard Mousasi, and he does have a puncher's chance or kick's chance. I mean, he's had a couple of spectacular kick knockouts, so he definitely has that opportunity. But I don't know. I think he's gonna find a hard time trying to hit Gegard Mousasi. Lastly, on Fight Pass, Diego Sanchez versus Joe Lauzon. It's crazy that these two have never fought before, but I think this is just going to be a war. I think we're going to see just two dudes going after it, swinging, grappling, taking people down, trying for submissions. We're probably going to see some blood. Somebody's going to get finished. These two guys have a pretty high finish rate overall, especially Joe Lauzon. He only, I think, has 2 decisions ever in his whole entire career. And this is just going to be an incredible fight, great way to end Fight Pass. And despite all the star power that this card has, this one very well could steal Fight of the Night. I know they don't technically do that, but I mean, in most people's eyes, could be Fight of the Night or get one of those performance bonuses. Before I get to the FS1 portion of the prelim card, I got to talk to one of the guys fighting on that part of the card, and that is Super Sage Northcutt. So let's see what Sage had to say about his fight against Enrique Marin. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and joining me on the line, we have a special guest. He will be fighting on the FS1 prelims portion of UFC 200. He is Mr. Super Sage Northcutt. And Sage, thanks for coming back on Beyond the Cage.
Oh, thanks a bunch. Thanks for having me.
Right off the bat, Sage, as I mentioned, of course, you're going to be part of the mega huge UFC 200 card, and that's got to be a pretty cool honor, you know, regardless of what you do in the rest of your career, that you got to fight at UFC 100, right? Or UFC 200, right?
Yes, sir. It's a huge honor, and it's an honor to be with the UFC and the biggest event that the UFC has ever had, UFC 200. It's such a big honor you can't describe it.
Now, I believe it was either on yours or another fighter's Instagram, you guys are going to be wearing special gloves for UFC 200 with a gold UFC logo. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It's pretty cool, actually. The gloves look awesome.
Now, did the gloves feel any different than the regular gloves, or it's just the fact that they're gold?
You know, they felt the exact same, the UFC gloves, just like the original UFC gloves, except you're right. They are, the UFC says UFC in gold on them, and it's the official UFC 200 fight glove, so that's in gold too, and it looks great. I think it's going to look awesome out there.
Now, of course, for UFC 200, a stacked card featuring, as of right now, 9 former or current UFC champions. Is there anyone else that you're just looking forward to either run into, meet, fight, talk to, or anything like that, Sage?
Yes, sir. Actually, you know, I'm always looking forward to meeting new fighters, new people, new fans. So everybody that's supporting UFC 200 and supports UFC, I'm looking forward to meeting them. And then all the fighters on the card are so awesome. So every time I get to meet one of the new fighters, it's a pleasure. It's awesome.
Now, I wanted to get your thoughts on the co-main event of the evening. Obviously, for most people, kind of came out of left field as former UFC champion, and he was currently wrestling for WWE. Brock Lesnar decided to come back for one more fight, taking on current UFC fighter and former K1 champion Mark Hunt. Did that kind of surprise you as well to hear Brock Lesnar was going to be back?
Oh, you kidding me? Yes, sir, it did. And then fighting Mark Hunt's awesome. So both of them, that's going to be an exciting fight, and I'm looking forward to watching it.
Now, of course, the main event of UFC 200 is John Jones against Daniel Cormier, a rematch for the two. They were supposed to meet at UFC 197. It got moved to 200. It's going to be a title unification bout. How do you see that one playing out, Sage?
You know, it's hard to say. I think it's going to be an awesome fight, and I think John Jones and Daniel Cormier really don't like each other. So, getting to see them fight, it's going to be awesome. Hopefully, I'll be sitting right there in the audience watching them fight after I fight too.
Now, speaking of your fight, I want to get to that right now. Of course, you're taking on Enrique Martin. Besides his one fight in the UFC, not much is known about him. He doesn't have a picture on a lot of websites. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page. He's fought a lot in Europe. There's not a lot of tape of him. Was this a hard guy to kind of prepare for, Sage?
No, I never have a fight camp, so I'm never specifically training for an opponent coming up or anything like that. It's actually I'm always training year round, very hard, and always trying to make my technique better. So that's kind of what I did for this fight is trying to make my technique better, and I'm excited to get out there and be fighting on UFC 200 and against my opponent.
Now, I know for your last fight, you did some training at TriStar up in Montreal. Did you do more training there, or did you kind of split time with some other camps?
Oh yes, sir. I was up at TriStar in Montreal for about 5 weeks, and then I actually had to come back. It was Mother's Day, and I had final exams to take, so I had to come back to take my final exams in person. And also, I was getting over having a staph infection, so I figured it was the best time to come back and take my finals also.
Now, was that the same kind of illness a little bit that you had during the Barberina fight, or was that something different?
No, sir, that was something different. And actually, it was kind of a weird thing. I had severe strep throat, so anybody that's had severe strep throat doesn't even want to get out of bed. And I had a relapse of it multiple times from first month to second month, and then the third relapse just 2 days before my fight actually going out there where the UFC took me to the Ready Clinic, the emergency room. So I definitely wasn't myself when I was out there fighting, and definitely no, I didn't fight like my normal self. So I'm ready for this fight coming up, UFC 200 Saturday.
Do you think that having going through something like you said, going to the hospital, also trying to prepare for a fight against a guy on short notice you weren't even expect to fight in the first place, do you think that is one of the reasons what possibly happened that night against Barberina?
Absolutely, yes, sir. And I believe it was a fluke. It would be a fluke if anyone gets sick before an event and has to get out there and fight. It's not like you're fighting with an injury, which you can use the rest of your body that's not injured. You're fighting so sick that you can barely stand up and you can barely breathe and barely get out there to be able to move around, and you're not your normal self out there. So yes, I wasn't my normal self, and but now this fight's coming up this Saturday, and I'm excited for it.
Is that a fight that if you got the opportunity later on in your career, would you like to run that one back against Barberina?
Well, sure. The UFC, whoever the UFC gives me, I'm willing to fight, and I love to fight. So I know I wasn't my normal self in that fight, so that wouldn't be a problem with me.
Now, because that was your first loss in your career, did training for this fight against Enrique, was there a different feel to it for you, or was it just kind of, I got another fight and I'm going to just focus on this?
There's not a different feel. Kind of like what I said, I wasn't my normal self my last fight, so nothing has really changed. Now I'm my normal self. Now I'm back again. I'm healthy, and I'm ready for this fight coming up. So just train like I normally do.
Of course, once again, your fight will be at 155 pounds. Your last fight, you had the catch weight due to the short notice at 170. So is it better for you that you're going to be back at 155?
My last fight I actually did fight as a 155er, so it sounds crazy, but the weight change within 1 week notice or less than a week notice to be able to go back up, we agreed to it because I was so sick at the time, and the UFC ended up releasing how sick I was after the fight, but yes, so I'm ready to fight at 155 pounds. I believe at 155, I'm one of the quickest and one of the strongest in the division. So I'm ready.
Now, of course, your fight's scheduled for 3 5-minute rounds. Do you expect it to go the full 15 minutes, Sage?
You always have to be prepared. So if it does go full time, then you have to be ready and prepared to be able to do that. But I always look to go out there and finish my opponents. So I've had 4 knockouts and 3 submissions on my pro career, and I'm looking forward to going out there and having a blast out there, put on a great show, but obviously going out there to finish my opponent.
All right, Sage, I'll get you out of here with this. This question is actually just for me personally because later in the year I will make my first visit to the state of Texas, which of course you are from, as I will be visiting Austin. So I wanted to get your recommendation as a Texan. What are some things I have to do in Texas, and what are some cool spots in Austin to say I had a full Texas experience?
Oh, Austin's beautiful. Austin's great. So a lot of different parts of Texas are great, but I believe Austin has a really cool place called the Hamilton Natural Spring Preserve, and I think I've been there before. I believe it's in Austin, but it's a waterfall that goes down, and it has like a little swimming hole you can swim in, and I believe it's open almost all day long. I think you pay just a few dollars to be able to get in, and there's hiking trails you can hike around. You can walk around like up in the woods, and it's pretty cool. Hopefully you'll get to see some wildlife.
All right, well, appreciate that. I'll have to write that down in my trip itinerary. So he is Super Sage Northcutt. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram, just his name, at Sage Northcutt. And he will be taking on Enrique Martin here on FS1 Saturday night starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. And Sage, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to your fight on Saturday night.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Once again, that was Sage Northcutt right here on Beyond the Cage. Once again, thanks for Sage to coming on the program once again. His fight against Enrique Marin, probably the weakest of this super stacked card, but nevertheless, Sage is a very exciting individual. 7 of his victories in his career, or actually all 7 of his victories, I should say, are by finish. 4 knockouts, 3 submissions. Marin is a guy that was on the Ultimate Fighter Latin America. I believe he's the only UFC fighter to come from the country of Spain. Didn't really impress me too much in his UFC debut, which I believe was on the Latin America finale back in November. And that was, I think that was against Montana. Yeah, Eric Montana, older of Dodger Montana's brother. He ended up losing a split decision. I believe that was for the contract. And it was an okay fight, but a guy that didn't really seem like he had a lot of conditioning, a lot of power. He still seemed raw in some areas, despite a record of 9-3. And I'm not sure if he's ready for a guy that can move like Sage Northcutt, that can hit like Sage Northcutt, and has that dynamic karate style like Sage does. And I also think Sage is the better conditioned athlete, and I think the bigger and stronger guy here at this weight class at 155. So he's going to have some tough work for him, and this is a good fight for Sage because his last fight, as he talked about in the interview, he was sick. He didn't feel himself. He lost to, I still think, a solid competitor in Brian Barberina. I think he proved that with his win there at UFC 98 down in Brazil. So Barberina is definitely no slouch, but this is a nice fight for Sage to try to get back on the winning track. And no offense to Marin, but he's going to have to step up his game tremendously from his performance that he had in November if he even wants a chance at defeating Sage. TJ Dillashaw against Rafael Asunciao. This fight could easily be a main event of a UFC on Fox or a Fox Sports 1 card. Definitely, in most cases, would be a pay-per-view main card fight, but we get it here on FS1, and that's how stacked UFC 200 is. The second time these two will meet inside the octagon. The first time, very close fight, but it went the way of Rafael Asunciao. And the difference this time, of course, TJ Dillashaw, since that loss, went on to capture the UFC Bantamweight Championship. He has now since lost it, but he defended it twice in the time between their first fight back in October of 2013. And since that point in 2013, Asunciao was able to get a few more victories, defeating the likes of Pedro Munoz and Brian Caraway, another big victory defeating a guy like Caraway. But he's been out since October of 2014, nearly 2 years. I think that's like 20 months or something like that, 21 months. So in that time frame, TJ Dillashaw has become one of the best fighters, not just in this division, but in the world. And Asuncia, with that big a layoff, this big a stage, UFC 200, despite being the undercard, and Dillashaw hungry for a rematch to try to get his championship back, I don't like his odds. I mean, that first fight was really close. It's not like Asuncia ran over Dillashaw or anything like that. It was a very close fight, and I just think that Dillashaw right now is just better. If Asuncia was continually fighting and beating other top guys like he had been, maybe my mind would be changed, but this is not a fight to me after that long layoff you want to take, because Dillashaw is hungry, like I said, to get back to a championship fight, and for a while there, this was his only loss, so I think he's also looking to kind of take that L back and put it to Rafael Asuncia. Looking at the next fight of the evening, Johnny Hendricks against Kelvin Gastelum. Both guys trying to reassert themselves in the welterweight title picture. For Gastelum, of course, he had that loss to Neil Magny on short notice back in November. That was his last fight. And Johnny Hendricks got knocked out in his last fight back in February against Stephen Thompson. And this should be interesting because Johnny Hendricks, really for the first time in a very long time, is close to falling out of contention. It was just, a little over a year ago that he was, either the number one contender, and of course he was the champion as of December of 2014 before losing to Robbie Lawler. He had that win against Matt Brown in 2015, then he had the whole weight cut debacle there in last October against Tyron Woodley. Then he gets knocked out by Stephen Thompson. Things are not going right here for Johnny Hendricks. And Kelvin Gastelum, he's no stranger to weight issues. Of course, the UFC, for one fight, forced him up a weight class to take on Nate Marquardt before they let him come back down. And that's when he fought Neil Magny in a very close 5-round decision. And I think he grew a lot from that experience, and he's definitely ready for a fight that could go 15 minutes and prove that I think he's got the weight on track, got his conditioning on track, and he's taking on probably the best guy he's ever faced in Johnny Hendricks. And Hendricks, of course, for the first time in a long time, looking to prove something, and beating a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, despite being ranked 12 rather to the UFC to his 6, it's still a victory that he needs to have, because this division has always been stacked and continues to be stacked, and you can't find yourself with 2 consecutive losses because it's going to take you a long time to get back up, especially for Hendricks, a guy who has kind of already been there and is starting to get older, whereas Gastelum, still a very young guy. A loss would not hurt him as much, and to a former champion, it would just be another experience that he can build upon for the future. So, man, I don't know. This is a very tough fight to call because they're both strong wrestlers. They both have solid stand-up. I wouldn't say anything amazing or top of the line. I think Gastelum maybe has a little better stand-up, but I would say Hendricks has more power of the two and definitely could end the fight with just one punch. So it should be interesting. I'm looking forward to it, though. To cap off the FS1 prelims, Juliana Pena against Kat Zingano. Huge fight in the women's bantamweight division. You can make a case the winner gets a title shot. I know Ronda Rousey and Holly Holm are lurking for what comes out of Miesha Tate and Amanda Nunes, but the winner of this fight could, to me, easily stake their claim at a number 1 contender spot, especially Kat Zingano, considering she has a victory over Miesha Tate and Amanda Nunes. So definitely for Kat, she is trying to get back into the title picture. Of course, Kat Zingano has not fought since losing her first title shot opportunity to Ronda Rousey in February of last year. Juliana Pena, since coming off an injury, has looked really good, and so far that horrible leg injury that she had has not seemed to bother her, and really the only problem she's had is some problems with the law, where she had a assault and battery charge, I believe, earlier this year, but She is able to fight now. Since coming back from injury, she is 2-0, knocking out Milana Duvea in April of last year and then defeating Jessica Ai in October of last year. And Kat Zingano, though, I think is a different animal than those two ladies and brings a nastiness to this division. She's big, she's strong, she has great jiu-jitsu, really probably a little better on top, but I think has a good bottom game. Striking-wise, I haven't really seen too much from Pena. She really tries to push the pace and go for the takedown. So I would have to side on Kat Zingano on the stand-up game just kind of from that MO. And what is interesting to me is, will Juliana be afraid to go inside Kat Zingano's guard and really get in close to Kat Zingano? Because that's kind of where Kat has made her career so far, in my opinion. Standing up and at distance, I think that's a little more unknown for both ladies, and I want to see if that comes to play at all. I think that would be interesting, but more than likely, we're going to see two girls just go at it, and I expect a finish in some form from either lady. Getting to the main card, what everybody's talked about, this huge stacked main card, again, starting on pay-per-view at 10 p.m. Eastern. Kicking off in the heavyweight division as Travis Browne takes on Cain Velasquez. Now, Browne has some of the best takedown defense ever in UFC history, but one of the times he's taking on an elite fighter with a good ground game, that being Fabricio Verdum, Verdum was able to take him down fairly well. And Cain Velasquez is definitely an elite level grappler, great wrestler, and I find it hard to believe that Travis Browne will be able to stop Cain Velasquez taking down. I think Travis Browne's best shot to win is to try to catch Cain coming in early and knocking him out, or in that weird awkward position if he can get up against the cage where Cain's trying for a double leg and he elbows him to the head like he did to Josh Barnett and Gabriel Gonzaga. I really think that's his best chance to win, because I think if it goes to the ground, he offers up nothing in the way of submissions that can, to me, throw Cain Velasquez off his game. And Velasquez, of course, he's been hurt. He's kind of not been ridiculed, but he's definitely been a little heat and a little hate has been thrown his way for the fact that he was still the champion despite all these injuries, and he was going to get the rematch against Verdum, and he got hurt again. So I think Cain Velasquez actually has a lot to prove in this fight. He wants to be back to the division. He wants to try to put those, injury bug things to rest, and I think he needs to go out there and have a dominant performance, and I think he can do it. And I think he can take Travis Browne down and just start pounding him and get a quick finish. I really think that's how this fight plays out. But Travis Browne can get a knockout, don't get me wrong, but I think Cain Velasquez, he's a man on a mission right now to try to get his title back, and Travis Browne stands in his way. Frankie Aldo versus Frankie Aldo. Yeah, well, it is Frankie versus Aldo. Jose Aldo, that is, takes on Frankie Edgar for the second time. The first time these two met was, I believe, during Super Bowl weekend a couple of years ago, and that was for the featherweight title. This time for the interim featherweight title. That was, February of 2013, so a little over 3 years since they first fought. And since that point in time, Frankie Edgar has stayed in the featherweight division. That was his first fight ever in the featherweight division against Jose Aldo. He has rattled off 5 consecutive victories, beating a who's who of fighters in the UFC, and 4 of those 5 were in the top 10 of, well, I guess I should say of a division, because Uriah Faber was a top 10 bantamweight, but he's beaten Charles Oliveira, BJ Penn, Cub Swanson, Uriah Faber, and most recently Chad Mendes in December of last year, knocking out Mendes in the first round. And Aldo, of course, is coming off his first loss in a very, 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 very long time. Only the second loss in his career. Before his fight against Conor McGregor, had not lost in, I think, almost 10 years. Rattled off, I believe, over 20 consecutive victories, and just looked nothing short of dominant. And ran into a left hand there from Conor McGregor in just 13 seconds and lost his featherweight championship, and has a lot to prove. A lot of people were doubting that Aldo still had it, talking about performance-enhancing drugs maybe affecting his performance. He's been hurt a lot. He's not the same guy. Conor proved that he really wasn't that good once he fought an elite guy and all that nonsense. And Frankie Edgar has really been wanting a shot at the featherweight title, and to me, a shot at Jose Aldo since losing, because I think Frankie got hurt early with the leg kicks. I don't think he was used to the speed of featherweights yet, and I think he had a lot going against him first time cutting weight. Even though he doesn't cut a lot of weight to make 145 pounds, it's still something he never had to do before in the UFC, and that little change in preparation to me makes a big difference. That's just my opinion. And also, like I said, the speed. He was not ready for the speed of Jose Aldo. This time around, he's now 5 fights into fighting at featherweight. He has the weight cut down. He knows what speed to expect. He knows the power to expect. And I think he knows what to do this time against Jose Aldo. Frankie Edgar is an ultimate tactician. He plans his fights out very well. He still has incredible footwork, incredible movement, and incredible work ethic. And I think this time around he will be ready for the speed and power of Jose Aldo. And for Jose Aldo, it'll be interesting to see how he comes out, because he came out very aggressive against Conor McGregor, got caught knocked down in 13 seconds. So will he try that strange strategy again, trying to put Frankie Edgar away, trying to prove a point that he still is one of the best fighters in the world and he should get another shot at Conor McGregor? Or is he going to lay back more and try to beat up that leg of Frankie Edgar like he did in their first fight and really torch him with leg kicks? Next fight of the evening will be for the Women's Bantamweight Championship, as Miesha Tate defends her title for the first time against top contender Amanda Nunes. And to me, the big thing about this fight is the first round. Nunes has shown problems with her conditioning, really, to me, beyond the first 5 to 8 minutes into the second round. And Miesha has always had good conditioning. She's also, I think, the better grappler, despite Nunes having a black belt in both judo and jiu-jitsu. I think that she can control the fight better when it hits the ground. And standing-wise, Nunes definitely has the more power, but I think Miesha's the better overall striker in terms of setting up punches and movement and all that stuff. Amanda just comes right at you with power and force. And if Miesha can't handle that early, then she's going to lose. But if she can weather the storm, avoid the big shots, try to tie up Nunes, not allow her to uncork any big power shots or get put too much in a compromising position, you definitely don't want Nunes on top of you early. And if she can do all that, get this fight, I think, into the third round, this fight should be hers. I mean, she's proven that she can win in the clutch. Contrary to popular belief with her Ronda fight, she needed, in my opinion, to get that finish against Holly Holm. The fight was either going to end as a draw or it was going to end with Tate losing an outright decision. So she needed to go in there, get the finish, and she got it done. And I think that experience, coming over adversity and being able to capture something that seemed so elusive to her for so many years, the UFC championship, and finally getting it, I don't think in this fight she's going to give it away easy. So Nunes, to me, even though her MO is to max out in the first round, I think that's just what she has to do. I don't think she can keep up with Miesha Tate for 25 minutes. I don't think that's possible, and I don't think that's a good strategy. I think you've got to try to get on her early and not allow Tate to dictate the pace of the fight later on. Mark Hunt versus Brock Lesnar in the co-main event of the evening. Who would have ever thought that when UFC 100 started getting talked about late last year and early in this year, that Brock Lesnar's name would even be mentioned to fight for the Ultimate Fighting Championship, not just for UFC 100, but ever again. It seemed like that kind of had been put to bed and he was done competing. He wasn't looking to come back, but something got to him and he wanted to come back, and so for one more time he will suit up in the 4-ounce gloves, and he's taking on Mark Hunt, the Super Samoan, who is coming off a first-round knockout over Frank Mir earlier this year, another walkout knockout, and he has knocked out back-to-back opponents going back to his rematch there against Bigfoot Silva. Has looked really good as of late. I mean, even though he lost to then, I guess, becoming the interim champion in Fabricio Verdum, Mark Hunt has looked really good, and is as powerful as ever. I mean, it's just crazy how much power this guy has. But the big difference in this matchup is the size. Mark Hunt, yeah, he weighs 265 pounds, but he's like 5'10". Brock Lesnar's 6'3", freak of nature. I still think, despite the layoff, he's been wrestling, which I know is not professional wrestling, I should say, which is not the same as training for the UFC fight, but he's still been active. It's not like he's just been sitting at home in his ranch in Canada doing nothing. So he's been somewhat physical, and he's obviously a guy that has prided himself on being the best. And I don't think if he thought he could take the physical punishment of training anymore that he would have signed up for this fight. I really don't. So I think he'll be ready to go. I think he'll be able to take Mark Hunt down. I think he'll be able to avoid that first strike and be able to knock out Mark Hunt. But I don't know. Mark Hunt's one of those guys it's hard to pick against just because he is so dangerous with his one-punch power. I mean, it just takes Brock coming in just a little bit for Mark Hunt to catch him. And being the shorter guy, Brock Lesnar has to come to him. And that really is an advantage for Mark Hunt catching him and knocking out the former UFC heavyweight champion. Main event of the evening, Jon Jones against Daniel Cormier. The rematch we've all been waiting for, at least I've been waiting for, was supposed to happen at UFC 197. Cormier had to pull out due to injury. They were able to reschedule it for UFC 197, and Jones was able to feel like he would recover enough from his fight against Ovince St. Preux in April to fight Cormier to unify the light heavyweight championship here at UFC 200. And I honestly think Daniel Cormier missed his chance at UFC 197, and he said it following the broadcast with Mike and Joe that he felt like he missed an opportunity that the Jon Jones we saw against OSP he would have beat. And I tend to agree with him. And this time around, Jones got the rust out of there. He got all the stuff he was working on, all the anger, frustration, motivation, internet comments against him saying he doesn't deserve to fight and the strip side, all that emotion kind of came into that fight, and I think he was able to get that out of the way against a guy coming in on short notice that he didn't really care one way or the other about, and now he can truly focus on a guy that he despises in Daniel Cormier and really give it his best effort and really be the guy that we expect Jon Jones to be as a fighter inside the UFC octagon. And I think Daniel Cormier has a chance. He's a stronger guy, I believe, and has knockout power, and I think will pace himself a lot better than he did in the first fight, and will, I think, make it more competitive. But will making it more competitive equal a victory this time around for DC? With that said, let's get to picks for UFC 200. First fight of the evening in the heavyweight division, as Cain Velasquez will take on Travis Browne. I think this fight's all Cain Velasquez. Despite all the injury talk and whatnot, I think Cain Velasquez is the better fighter and will get a win here on Saturday. Jose Aldo against Frankie Edgar. I think Frankie Edgar has been on a mission really in the last year or two, trying to get another shot at the featherweight championship. And he's just one step closer. If he can win this fight, he'll reach his goal of becoming the third ever multi-weight class champion in the UFC. And while Aldo is dangerous as he's ever been, I think it's Frankie Edgar's time, and I think he will win this rematch against Jose Aldo. Miesha Tate against Amanda Nunes. I really do like Amanda Nunes. She's one of my favorite fighters to watch. She's really explosive. She always is going for the finish, but I think she's going to have a tough time trying to put Miesha Tate away. I think she might gas out, and we either see Tate dominate her for 5 rounds or then eventually maybe get a submission or knockout in the 3rd or 4th. So give me Miesha Tate to defend her title. Brock Lesnar against Mark Hunt. I know in my breakdown I seem to be siding with Brock Lesnar, and I think Brock Lesnar will win this fight, but there's just something about Mark Hunt. The last couple of fights, I picked him, I've been right, and I'm going to take the Super Samoan. I'm going to take the upset and take Mark Hunt to beat Brock Lesnar. Daniel Cormier against John Jones. I do think this is going to be a different fight than the first time, but like Daniel say, and I'm going to say it now, I think he missed his chance to beat John Jones. I really did, and I think John will be a lot better prepared for this fight here in July than he would have been back in April. So I'm going to take John Jones to unify the titles and once again become the UFC undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world. Once again, I would like to thank Sage Northcutt for coming on the show. I'd like to thank my friends at MMASignaturesUSA.com, MMAforlife.ca, MMAinsider.net, TopRatedMMA.com, Sean Jacoby over at American Icon Autographs, also the great fellows running the forum website, themmmacommunity.com, and also our partners at the newly minted website, MMAFightClub.net, and of course they started and continue to run a great Facebook blog, facebook.com/MMA Fight Club. So go there, like the page, and join the conversation today. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. Subscribe right here to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast by hitting the subscribe button. It's just down there. And also, if you haven't already, please like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. We're just 25 likes away from 500. When we hit 500, we'll be giving away 10 or 12 or so signed 8x10 photos from a host of MMA fighters and kickboxers like Joe Schilling, Dwayne Ludwig, Darren Cruikshank, Jordan Meehan, Brian Ebersol, Brad Martinez. Boy, I think I'm missing a couple here, but that's just to name a few that will be given away as part of our 500 likes contest. So if you haven't done already, please go to our page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Once again, I am Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.